I made notes. I can't promise that I'm going to be super effective and competent and cohesive for the whole video. Part of the point of these videos for me as a personal exercise is to start to learn to speak more cohesively and intelligently without a script. I've done many videos before, but I've had them mostly scripted out in advance and been able to take some time to gather my thoughts. I'm not giving myself that luxury for these videos, and that's partially why I'm not putting them out on as wide a circulation. But I have a list of things I want to talk about in an order I want to talk about them, because these videos kind of feel important-ish. Only sort of, because there's nothing that I'm going to say that other people haven't already been saying. But it's stuff that's important to me, if nothing else. So it is remarkably difficult to keep up to date with Mr. Donald Trump. And yes, I did promise that Trump would be the first video in this little mini-series on the establishment, for lack of a better word. The man seems to make some brand new gaffe or idiocy every 15 minutes, and sometimes it feels like a bit of a circus. And some of those are really important, and some of those are less important, but by this point I've sort of gotten used to the idea that there's a racist and a bigot in the White House, and that the system will hold him in check fairly effectively for the next 4 years. We'll definitely be seeing a shift to the right on American federal policy, but I'm pretty convinced it's going to be a shift to the center-right, because, for starters, his string of idiotic executive orders have been stopped in the courts, and will continue to be stopped in the courts, I'm absolutely convinced. And the Republican Congress he has to work with, yes, it's largely Republican, but it's not wildly over-the-top Republican, for the most part. There's a contingent in Congress, but they don't hold the majority. The man is an idiot, but he has been tapping into a lot of anger. And I should say that I see the same anger on my own Facebook feed, which includes a lot of very, very left-wing individuals. I mean, the kinds of responses I see when I go to right-wing news sources that are praising Trump and screaming about the liberal establishment are virtually identical to the kinds of responses that often show up on my own Facebook feed screaming about the conservative establishment. And I'm not sure either of them are helpful. Okay, I'm sure both of them are not helpful. That's what I'm sure of. So this metaphor that Trump keeps using about draining the swamp in Washington, this is not a metaphor that would not go over well with half of my friends, because, well, they're equally convinced that the government is made up of people who don't have the public's best interest in heart and are merely sort of technocrats plugging away. But I know a lot of government bureaucrats, some more closely than others, and I have a huge amount of respect for a lot of the work they do. Mostly my connections are on the municipal level. I know a lot of people at City Hall, but I've had excellent experiences with federal and provincial politicians and bureaucrats, and they do really good work. They are experts in their field. So we have a general process of having elected officials who take information given to them by various experts and set policy from that direction. But the experts are really important. I don't want environmental policy being made by people who have never studied the environment. I don't want health policy being made by people who have never studied medicine. These are the sorts of things that the system relies upon. And this is what the so-called swamp is made up of. You walk into City Hall, and you're walking into a building full of people who are experts in a wide variety of fields. The problem is that even in a city like London, with 1/3 people, there are thousands of people on any given side of an issue. And that's if we're talking fringe positions. There is no position that all the people want, that's obvious to everyone. And it's easy to get caught in our bubbles and be like, oh, this is the public policy that is the obvious policy. But when people say they want better roads, they have a point. When people say they want better schools, they have a point. When people say they want more development, they have a point. When people say they want heritage buildings preserved, they have a point. When people say they want lower taxes, they have a point. None of these are bad things to want. And the thing is that if you look at that list, just that list, you'll notice that it's not entirely clear that we can have all that list at one time. Indeed, it's pretty clear that we can't. I just named a series of very expensive things and said we want all of these, and we do. I want all of those too. I also mentioned that we'd like to preserve our heritage and we'd like more development, and sometimes those come into conflict. For that matter, sometimes new development and environmental issues come into conflict. And for everything, even if there are solutions that are expensive but workable, then we need to tax people to pay for those solutions. And, no one wants to pay more taxes than they have to. No one should have to pay more taxes than they have to. So there's always a balancing act involved. And I feel that there are a wide variety of people on all ends of the political spectrum right now who have lost all patience for compromise. Indeed, compromise seems to be becoming something of a dirty word in the political world, which, either we compromise or we start shooting each other, and that's really, I don't like option B. So the last thing I want to talk about, and I realize this is very old news, but Trump's inauguration. He was inaugurated in Washington. Half the people turned out to see him that usually do. That was expected. But what the sort of conversation that was running around my particular circle, because I'm involved in the Anglican Church, is that the Episcopal Cathedral in Washington chose to have a celebratory service as part of the inauguration. And there were a lot of people who were very upset about this. The Episcopal Church in the United States is easily the most liberal of the United States' mainstream denominations. And there are people, there are parishes in the Episcopal Church who are refusing to use Trump's name during service. And there are a lot of Episcopalians who are very annoyed about Trump's inauguration. But I don't see... The National Cathedral in Washington has had a celebratory service for every president's inauguration for a century-ish? I'm not quite sure when they started. Well before I was born. And it's important to remember that one of the things that Trump represents is a threat to the sort of establishment way of doing things in the United States and across the world. And that means a threat to stable, settled, civilized government. We need to be able to distinguish throughout between Trump's character, which is deplorable, Trump's particular actions, many of which are also deplorable, but some of which might be reasonable, and Trump's office, which deserves all the dignity we give it, and probably more. It's important that we remember that the presidency is still a dignified and important office, even if the person currently holding it is not dignified or, for that matter, particularly important. And so it's important that we give respect to the office of the presidency. At the same time, it's important that we recognize that the current president is a bigot and a racist, and it's important that we be willing to take each of his policies one by one, and in each case be able to say why this particular policy is problematic. Simply saying this policy is problematic because it comes from Trump isn't going to cut it. In each case, we're going to need people to say, this is why this is wrong. And in some cases, we're going to have to be able to say that, no, I mean, this is a fine policy. He has said and done a couple of things I agree with. I have to dig pretty deep to find them, but there have been a couple. And we need to be able to take his policies on a case-by-case basis. I say this not being an American. I have my own political fights to fight here in Canada, but I sympathize with the impulse that the Episcopal Cathedral was good and right not to break with tradition, and we need to continue to say that this is an important office, and this is an office that does important things, and that we are not going to allow Trump to ruin it for us, so to speak. So, the next video I will be talking about globalization, and that will be much more Canadian-centric. And the video after that I will be talking about electoral reform. Maybe I'll swap those. So the next video I'll talk about electoral reform, because that's an immediate issue. Justin Trudeau has said that he doesn't want to do electoral reform in Canada anymore, and I'm not happy about that. And I find that a lot of people don't quite understand what electoral reform means. So I'm going to be running through the 4 main electoral systems that get talked about, and talking about the advantages and disadvantages behind each of them. I don't want anyone to imagine that there is a perfect electoral system. First past the post, instant runoff voting, single transferable vote, and mixed member proportional, those are the big 4. However, all 4 of them have significant flaws. I'm certainly going to be arguing that first past the post has the most flaws, but we're not in a situation where there's an obvious choice, but we are in a situation where we need to change. And we need to remind Mr. Trudeau that he ran for office in part on a policy of supporting electoral reform, and we need to encourage him to continue to do that.